How many times do we want to do God's will and feel like He is not there to help us? We might have a problem and God is not there to help us or guide us through those problems. Or you might have a religious friend who uses every ridiculous sign to justify a decision or action you know is contrary to Catholic Church teaching, such as dating a married man or using maybe immoral ways to get pregnant or running a business unethically. Hello everyone, today's episode is about the intellect, the faculty that is the ordinary means of solving problems, bringing peace into our lives through proper risk management, and doing God's will by making key decisions through discernment and prayer. Instead of relying on Google as our God, which I call the new Gnosticism, we can rely on our intellect, which God has given us to be like Him.
Welcome to another episode of Practical Catholic with David Cease. Practical Catholic is a spiritual coaching show to help you find peace, love, and joy in family and work life. We are here each and every week to help you grow spiritually, to become successful in this life, and to be a saint for the life after.
My story is more of a joke. I heard this joke a while ago, and I'm really impressed by it. So I'd like to tell you this joke. So there once was a man who was listening to the radio as he was eating his breakfast, and he heard on the radio station a warning that said, "Please evacuate your house." And it was in his town, and the radio station man said there's going to be a huge flood in the town, and it's going to be dangerous, and people will drown if they do not evacuate. So the man turns off the radio, and he says, "God will deliver me from this danger. I have faith, and He'll deliver me." So, lo and behold, a knock is on the door. He opens up the door, and there's a police officer there. And the police officer says to the man, "Sir, you have to leave the house because there's a flood coming, and it will be very dangerous here." So the man looks at the police officer in the eye and he says, "I have faith in God, and He'll deliver me from this danger." So then the police officer leaves, and meanwhile, the flood is coming. The water goes up to his first level of his house, so he has to run up to the second level of the house. And he sees a boat crossing, and they yell at the man through the window, and they say, "Sir, jump in our boat. You need to come in our boat because the flood's going to rise even further, and you're going to get killed by the flood." So the man looks at the boat driver and says, "I have faith in God. He will deliver me from this danger." And so the boat leaves so they can save other people. So now the water rises up to the second level, and he has to escape up to the top of his house. So he's on his roof, and he sees a Coast Guard helicopter flying by, and they drop a piece of rope, and they say, "Grab onto the rope, and we'll take you to higher ground." And so the man says to the helicopter pilot, "I have faith in God, and He'll deliver me from this danger." So lo and behold, the water comes, and it washes the man away, and he drowns, and he dies. So he's up in heaven, and he sees God. And so he's shocked to know that he had died. So he looks at God, and he says, "God, I had faith in you. Why didn't you deliver me from that danger?" And God replies and says, "I sent you a radio message. I sent you a police officer, the boat, the helicopter. What else do I need to send to you that you would listen to me?" So I love that story because sometimes we are so blinded by our faith and by the extraordinary, miraculous things that God can do, and He can, that we don't see the ordinary way, and God helps us. All right? So certainly I believe in miracles, and miracles do exist. I wouldn't be a good Catholic if I didn't think that. But those are extraordinary means. But God also works through ordinary means to help us to grow and to love. You know, like He sends us parents and fathers and mothers. He sends us doctors to help us, to heal us. He sends us priests to help us, to nurture our souls. And these are ordinary means. And so 9 out of 10 times, a lot of times He helps us through the ordinary means and not so much the extraordinary means. And so, we have to understand that God has given us a really good ordinary means to help us in the day-to-day life, to grow in virtue and love and making decisions. And that great gift he's given us is called the intellect. This is one of the greatest gifts that God has given us because this is the gift that makes us really, really, really like him, like God. So we're going to talk about 3 elements, hopefully, by today. We're going to talk about problem solving. We're going to talk about how we use this to do risk management. And the third is discernment. So let's recap a little bit about the intellect from our last episode. That was, I believe, episode 8. In that episode, we talked about 2 types of knowledge. The first type of knowledge is called sensitive knowledge. And that sensitive knowledge we get is through our senses. Our senses give us images. And when we say images, we're not talking just about pictures. We're talking about, photographic or mind images. And those images are brought about by our senses. So all of our senses brings out knowledge. And that knowledge, that sensory knowledge, is fed into the part of our intellect called the imagination. There's in our imagination, all of those senses go through there. And then that sensory knowledge is stored in our memory. Now, the reason why I go through the imagination is because our imagination is part of the intellect that allows us to create what we call phantasms. Phantasms are the ability to, what we call imagination, right? Use our imagination. Daydreams come through this way. Night dreams come through that way. And all these ideas come out through there. Now, remember, the imagination can never create out of nothing, all right? It only creates out of something. So it has to come through that sensory knowledge and use that as a baseline, and then it can extrapolate and create more ideas. And that's part of what we call intellectual knowledge. Intellectual knowledge is the second type of knowledge, and there's 2 types of that. We acquire intellectual knowledge through our imagination, which our intellect can control our imagination to produce ideas. The second way intellectual knowledge is acquired is through our intellect, which can receive those ideas from our imaginations, and they can make judgments, like true or false judgments. And those judgments are then lead us to reason, and then we can deduce from reason conclusions. And that's how we get intellectual knowledge. So 2 types of knowledge, sensitive knowledge and intellectual knowledge. And then part of our intellect is called the memory, which then stores both types of knowledge, intellectual as well as sensitive. And the more that we get of both of those, the more we can make more intellectual knowledge. It's almost like a compounding effect. It's very, very compounding, because what happens is as we create more intellectual knowledge and also sensitive knowledge, we can then compound on that and extrapolate it. Yeah, I mean, the only way I can kind of visualize this, it's almost like a nuclear effect, right? When one nucleus blows up, it permeates other nucleus, and it just kind of blows up to be this big explosion. So it's once you can harness the power of intellectual knowledge, there's really nothing that we can't do. This is why human beings can advance. As I mentioned in the last episode, bees of today still do the same thing bees 5,000 years ago. They produce honey and they make wax. They haven't changed. They work in a colony. That's because they don't have an intellect to advance. But we can, through this intellectual knowledge, and compound everything that's in there. So it's very important to understand that. So a lot of times, now I'm going to touch real briefly on what prevents us from using developing, I should say, the intellectual knowledge. And the reason why I'm going to talk about this more next episode, but I want to briefly touch on it because I think it's important to understand this before we talk about how we can really, really get into the problem-solving skills. So the one thing that we got to understand is, we do not use this part of our intellect called reason. All right. And we don't use intellectual knowledge. We don't develop that part because we typically don't use our imagination, and we typically do not use the intellect to reason and deduce. All right. Why? And I think, one of the things that I've noticed when I hire new graduates, or sometimes people who want to get into development, developing code at a later age, I find that their lack of problem-solving skills occurs mainly because it's almost like their imagination and their intellectual reasoning has atrophied, or they're not using it. What we call atrophy is when you don't use a certain part of your muscles, it'll start shrinking, right? It's almost like that part of the brain or that part of the intellect has shrank or hasn't developed because they haven't used it. And so what typically happens at the workforce? What do I see? I see that they're very lazy and think and try to just search the answer through Google, or they will try to ask you the question, right? So they don't take the initiative trying to find out the answers themselves. They don't know how to reason to come to conclusions. They can't use their imagination to get things done. And so what I had to do is I had to develop pretty much a program to help my employees, mentoring them on simple things of how to problem solve, how to use that part of the imagination and the intellect to deduce reason. And so why are these college students, and why do people have this lack of problem solving and lack of using their imagination and deducing reason? Well, I come up with right now about 4 reasons, and I'll break them down in these 4 ways, and then you're going to hear them probably next episode, but I'm going to go more in depth in the next episode. But briefly, it's this. First is there's TMI, too much information, and Google. Now, I have nothing against Google. I use it a lot. But what happens is people use Google as a crutch. That's what they typically do. Most of the answers are on the Google. So what people expect is a simple yes or no answer on or how to do from Google. The issue with Google is that it is only knowledge and not wisdom. Now, as I said in the past, wisdom is a combination of knowledge and experience, because wisdom gets things done. Knowledge doesn't get things done. I can know everything about certain things, but not get things done. I was telling one of my employees as an example of this was that there's a story about 4 guys from MIT sitting at a table, and all of a sudden the light goes out and there's a short circuit on the light. So these 4 smart, brilliant MIT graduates are talking about everything about how to, that we should need to change this light fixture, but they were nervous about the electricity, all this, about it getting shocked and it might be dangerous, might get killed, blah, 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 blah. So they had all this knowledge, and they even knew how to fix it, and they knew a lot about the principles of electricity. But no one moved to fix this fixture until one of their other friends, the 5th friend, comes along, not an MIT graduate, and he goes along and he fixes it within, 5 minutes. And he looks at the other 4 and says, guys, as long as you don't arc the wires, you're not going to get electrocuted. That's wisdom. He had the wisdom to solve the problem and not debate or analyze or have fear to fix the problem. So what happens here is that Google, unless they give you a yes or no answers, typically do not solve the problem. They really don't. You still have to problem solve. It's a great way to start, and they might give you anywhere from 60 to 70% of the answers to get there, but you need to have the wisdom and the experience to finish the other 30 to 40%. So That's one of the things. So we rely too much on Google and what's going on there. The second is our educational system. It's not to say that our educational system is evil of in itself and it's bad. I mean, certainly my kids go through school. We homeschool. But it tends to focus on understanding knowledge rather than using deductive reasoning and imaginations. So that's one of the big things that we see in today's educational system is that it's all about knowledge. It's all about the knowing rather than deductive reasoning and using our imagination and to bring out ideas. This is why I think a good liberal arts education is the closest in using deductive reasoning to get knowledge. I had to take some liberal arts course. I was a computer science major going through Villanova University, and I, had to take some liberal arts course. I had to take a lot of political science courses because I had the Navy ROTC program, and they mandated us to take up these political science courses. And they were amazing because it really helped me to reason, to come out with ideas. So a good liberal arts education does that. When we have art, when we have engineering, or when we have a sciences, sometimes it doesn't allow us so much to focus on the use of imagination. Hovering parents. This is probably one of the biggest problems we have, is that hovering parenting styles have brought this idea that parents, kind of control their kids. Parents don't, by doing this, by being a hovering parent, parents don't allow for creativity, play dates. Everything is managed, all right? Everything's structured, that the kids really don't make their own ideas or use their own imaginations to do this. Basically, we force feed information to our kids and produce robotic behaviors rather than one of exploration, imagination, and deductive reasoning. Now, when I was growing up, back in the 70s and 80s, my mom would say, go out and play. I don't want to see you for the next 5 or 6 hours. Gone. Get out of here. Now, you might say my mother was a bad mother for kicking me out of the house, but she wasn't. She was a great mother for doing that because of all the things I had to do. I had to learn how to communicate with my other friends, negotiate with my other friends, going over their house and saying, hey, Johnny, can I play with you? And they're saying, well, I don't really want to go outside. I want to watch television. And I might say, well, why don't we just watch a little bit of television and then we can play soccer later? All right. So we learned all these skills. We used to learn imagination. I had a friend of mine who loved baseball. That's all he thought about was baseball. And so when it was just him and I playing, we certainly couldn't play baseball. So what we used to play is called a cup ball. And what we got was a Dixie cup, and we crushed the Dixie cups, maybe like 4 or 5 of them together, to make it into like a little ball. And then we used a little broomstick, and we would say that if we was able to hit the cup ball to this distance, it would be a single. Further out, it would be a double. Further out, it would be a triple. And we just thought of this all our own. When we went to play, go to the park to play various games, we made up our own games. We would deviate from traditional games like maybe basketball. Maybe we didn't know we couldn't play a full court, so we play half court. All of these things we did, and we did not have structured things to do, so that we were forced to think of ideas and negotiate those ideas and talk to other peoples about those ideas. So hovering parenting, as a homeschooler. My wife, one of the things she does is there's points in our day where we just say to them, go figure it out, go play, go do something. All right. And a lot of times they might say, well, Mom, I don't know what to do. And we would look at them and say, well, just figure it out, figure something out, go out. And they would eventually go outside. They'd look at the different plants and animals and maybe make up games, create tea parties. There's a lot of things that they can do. So the last is the world does is it narrows the understanding of the use of the imagination. If I were to ask anyone, In fact, I actually did. One time I asked my employees, I said to them, I took a poll of like 3 or 4 employees, and I said to them, if I use the word imagination, what do you think about? And most of them said, I think about the arts. I think about artwork. That we've reduced using our imagination to the arts. And the imagination can really be used for everything. Our relationships, to spirituality, to work, for problem solving, everything. So what's the paradigm shift here? The paradigm shift here is we need to leverage our intellect to control our imagination, to produce ideas and use those ideas to make judgments, conduct deductive reasoning. This will allow us to problem solve, be at peace when we conduct risk management and discernment. Problem solving is used in many applications at work, home, and spirituality. We need to rely more on our intellect than Google. And this is the point that we have to understand. So, I want you to understand the key importance of imagination to bring out ideas, and then using our intellect to use to make judgments, okay? And then you make judgments to do deductive reasoning, all right? So let's talk about problem solving. So I have a methodology in problem solving. One of my business my business is about problem solving. So I have to teach and mentor my employees how to problem solve. And so, before I talk about this methodology of problem solving, I want to talk about briefly what problem solving is and what it's not. All right? And I do this because we have bad habits, and those bad habits, I tell my employees, need to be broken. And so if you see these bad habits, then they need to stop, because I'm going to tell you 2 bad habits, and then what problem solving really is. Okay? So the first is pessimists. All right? A lot of times we are pessimistic. And what does that mean? These are the type of people that when they see an obstacle or a problem, they just say, they only pick out those problems and obstacles. They never see the good. They only see the issues. The result is they typically do not problem solve because they stop when the obstacle is there and they can't overcome those obstacles. The mentality for these people is why it cannot be done. Well, it can't be done because of this. It can't be done because of that. It can't be done. And they criticize why every idea will not work because of all the issues. They don't realize that maybe we can overcome these obstacles, especially if we give a little effort. They only see the obstacles. They look at the mission as insurmountable because of all these obstacles, and then they quit, and they become very negative. So that's one type of mode that a person is in. And the second type of mode that people go into is the opposite, which is they're the optimist, only looks at the good things, but neglects the obstacles and problems. The result is that they start a task and they're all zealous and they want to do this, and they seem cheerful and they're like, oh yeah, that's easy. I can get that done. And then they fail because they don't overcome the obstacle or the problem because they fail to see that, and they fail to plan and overcome that. These types of people start with great enthusiasm, but never get things done. They're like, yeah, I can get that done. That'll be easy. And then eventually they only get 50% done, and they can't finish it because the obstacles are too overwhelming. So looks at the mission with a blind eye, but can never get there. That's what optimists get involved with. So they look at the mission with a blind eye. Yeah, I can get there. And they're all enthusiastic. And then they lose wind after accomplishing 50% of the task. So those are called the optimists. But a real problem solver looks at the mission and creates a path to get there, and sees both the good that covers most of that path and reviews the gaps or the blocking issues and focuses only on the gaps or the shortfall that prevents you from achieving the mission, and focuses on how to overcome those gaps. So if we look at a problem solver, they map out where I am and how to get to accomplish my mission, and then map it out and see how much the good aspects can get us there, and then realize what are all the gaps or the blocking issues, and then focuses on how to overcome them. So it combines both the good and the bad to map out this path to succeed. So they usually are results oriented, and they accomplish the mission. The mentality of them is how it can be done. And they look at the mission as a path to get there and focuses on the gaps. Now, the reason why I explain that is because you have to have that type of mentality. Because the other two mentalities, the pessimist and the optimist, really do not get you there, because they're blinded, one blinded by the negativity and one blinded by the positivity, and they both will fail. They both will not focus on the problem and will not focus on overcoming the problem. So how do we, if we become a problem solver, what are the steps, okay, to being a really good problem solver? Well, the first is I'm going to explain 3 things that you need to have to understand and to be a good problem solver. The first is the first thing that you need to have is what I call zooming out. We need to be able to zoom out when we problem solve. So I'm going to create a fake scenario here. The fake scenario is that you're in a room, and the room has a window, it has a vent, and it has only one door that you can get out of. And you are locked in that room, and you try to open up the door through the handle, and you realize it's locked, okay? And that's what it is. So what zooming out means is that you're able to realize that the door is locked. And now for me to keep trying to open up the door by opening up the latch is not going to work. A myopic person would keep trying to do that over and over again. But a person who zooms out would zoom out and say, okay, what is my situation here? What are other ways that I can exit out? There's a window out there. Could I break the window? Can I wave at a person who's outside of that window to help me open up the door? Can I go through the vent? All right. So zooming out means, let's zoom out and see if there's anything else that we can do. A lot of times people focus on trying to get out the door, and they're like, I can't get out of the door. I can't get out of the door, and try to do the same thing over and over again, which is trying to open up the door through the handle. So we have to stop and zoom out. Part of zooming out is exactly this. 1, understand the situation that you're in. Okay, I'm in a room with windows, with doors. The knob is either stuck or it's locked. All right, there's a vent. There's a chair. Understand the situation. Understanding the mission. Okay, a lot of times people get wrapped around the myopic aspect of trying to open up this door and forget what's really the mission. The mission is trying to get out the door or out of this room. That's the mission. And there's a lot of ways of doing that. They might be waving someone down through the window, might be breaking the window, might be going through the vent. It might be using your cell phone to make a phone call. There's a lot of ways of accomplishing that mission and doing that. So focus on the mission. What really is the mission? The mission is me getting out of the room. The mission isn't me to fix the door. The mission isn't, for me to go through the door. The mission is for me to get out of this room. And there's many, many ways of doing that. And then the third about zooming out is try to understand what are the steps for me to do that. Do I need to break the door? Do I need to break the window? Do I need to wave at someone? If it is, then what are the steps of doing that? Step 1 is waiting until someone shows up in that window. Step 2 is waving at them. Step 3 is trying to communicate with them that you're stuck in the room. And then step 4 is how do you communicate enough and work with them to open up that door? So it's for zooming out, you have to zoom out, look at the situation, figure out what is the ultimate mission that we got to accomplish, and then what are the steps to accomplish those missions, So that's one aspect that you have to do. The next is called playing it out. And this is where your imagination really, really takes hold. So in step one, which we talk about zooming out, I talked about creating steps, right? Or creating these ideas of it, right? So now we have to play that out. We have to use our imagination to play out these different case scenarios to figure out which one would actually be the most likely, the easiest, the best decision. So we play it out. So let's say, for example, we decide, hey, you know what? I'm going to wait until someone goes through that window and try to, wave them and communicate to them that I'm locked in this room. So now play it out. So you play it out and you say, all right, so I got to wait until a person is there. So how am I going to communicate with this person? Is this window soundproof? Is it not soundproof? All right. Is it? Can I use sign language? Can I use miming techniques? Right. So all of these things that you look at and you play it out. Well, how long is it going to take a person to get to that window? Is it going to take a long time? Is it going to take a short time? How often have I seen people walk through and be at that window? So you're playing it out and you're using your imagination. All right. There's two things that in playing out that I use a lot. One is your imagination to look at the sequences of events and this idea that I'm doing. All right. The second thing that I use is what I call simulate ideas by past experiences. This is really important. I talk about this because this really helps out a lot. What do I mean by simulate ideas by past experience? What I mean by that is a lot of times we want the answers to every question and we want something that we've done in the past that mimics exactly like what has happened. So we prepare for exactly a case scenario. But what I do is I look at it and say, what have I experienced in the past that from a high level, this is key, high level simulates something like this, but isn't exactly like this, all right? And I'll give you an example of that. So in the past, I've changed a muffler on a car, all right? So most of my cars are probably about 10 to 15 years old. They're usually rusty and they fall apart. So every once in a while, I do need to change a muffler. And so the easiest way of doing that is you cut off parts of the muffler and then you replace that with some muffler pieces that you can get at AutoZone or wherever and put it on. And then you get a new muffler and you put that on. And there's a whole process of doing that. Now, one time I had a conversation with a doctor. I was at some kind of probably a business meeting, and he was a doctor. And I asked him, I said, "What do you do?" And I goes, "Well, I typically replace knees or I replace hips." And so we had this long conversation about hip replacement, and he was very amazed about how smart I was about asking various questions on the hip. So I asked him questions like, how do you size, the parts for the new hip? How do you attach that hip? How do you, what kind of tools do you use to cut the hip? And the reason why I could ask these intelligent questions, and they were there, was mainly because I changed a muffler. And all those questions came from the idea of the changing of the muffler. I had to use a special instrument to cut the muffler, So he must have need to use a special instrument to cut the hip. What happens when the piece that you cut off deteriorates other pieces? So a lot of times when I cut muffler pieces, other pieces start falling apart or get rusted. I'm sure he runs into similar problems with hip replacements because typically most people who replace a hip are in their 70s or 80 years old and other pieces of their body is starting to fall apart. I know, how do you fit, these pieces together, right? For example, how do I fit this new muffler to something else? What is the device that connects them together? Because I have to connect this old piece of muffler to the new pieces of the muffler. So this is called simulated ideas by past experience. We can actually visualize things through our past experience. And it doesn't have to be a one-to-one exactly the same. We can use a similar situation, not the exact, like this, changing a muffler to changing a hip, right? Or a hip replacement. It's the same from a high level. Yes, execution-wise is different, but you can get the gist and the idea based off of those experiences. So that's how you can start playing it out. Another good way of playing it out would be like, let's say if we're traveling to California, and maybe I've never traveled 3,000 miles in a car to go to California, but I have traveled at least, 500 miles to go from Connecticut to DC. And because of that one experience, I can start extrapolating that. I can extend that idea that, I drove about 500 to 600 miles to DC, and I knew that was the most I could ever drive. I knew that I had to stop to go to the bathroom. I knew I had to stop to get gas. I knew I had to stop to get food. So now extrapolating that, or not extrapolating, but extending that idea, driving to California, I would only be able to drive about 500 to 600 miles. And because of that, I divide 3,000 miles, divide that by 600, that gives me about 5 days. I can deduce that it's going to take me 5 days to do that. I can also deduce that I'm going to have places to rest and to stop and to get gas, right? I can even probably deduce how much it's going to cost me based off of just that one drive, just that one time from going from Connecticut to DC. That gave me enough experience that I can extend that to a 5 to 6 day drive out to California. These are ways that we can play things out through our past experience that doesn't have to be a one-to-one exactly the same. That's what a lot of people want to find. If they never drove to California, they're going to Google and say, what do I need to do to prepare for myself to go to drive to California? Boom. And it's going to say, well, you need this, this, and this. Well, you don't need to do that. You can deduce a lot of this through reasoning. Okay? And why do you want to do that? Because it makes it your own. It makes it your own. And then you can, then what happens is instead of being a robot and driving out to California, and then realizing that there might be detours, there might be unexpected events that occur, and getting all frustrated and trying to use Google again to fix your problem, you can be more flexible and dynamic because these are your ideas and you know what to do when the fluidity of life comes in and more problems arise during the execution. Which then tells us the third step or the third element of problem solving, which is execute your ideas. All right? Execute your ideas. Now, here's one thing to understand and go to, I believe it's episode 3 where I talk about failure. That failure is not really failure. Failure is actually learning. And so when we execute our ideas, we want to look at it and see, did it fail or did it succeed? Because the reason why is there's no such thing as failure. Failure is always learning. Remember, if you use the iterative approach, and please go to my podcast episode about failure, that once you use the iterative approach, you realize that failure is not really failure. It's actually learning. And so when you iterate through your execution, you will then be able to tweak and to improve what you are doing. That's how you make failure a success. Because in life, we will rarely succeed the first time. We will rarely succeed the first time. So by using the iterative approach, failure becomes a way of becoming a feedback. All right, I call that the feedback loop, right? Okay, that didn't work. Well, maybe we need to adjust it. Maybe we need to figure things out and tweak it and make it a little bit better. So we have to understand that when we execute and our ideas, once we play it out and we choose the right idea to do it, that we need to tweak it. Now, the tweak might even be maybe we make another decision, right? So always understand the execute process is just, if we get the iterative approach, is just feedback for us to tweak, fix, and make better. I was actually having a nice conversation with my son who's doing online e-commerce, and he totally agreed with it. He says, Dad, I've learned that, to overcome obstacles, you just have to accept the failures as really feedback and just keep tweaking it and fixing it. And it's amazing how successful he's getting. So that's what we do to problem solve. Now, we have to exercise our imagination. I mean, I do exercises, right? I have mentoring exercises with my employees to help them, focusing them on their imagination. So I might say to them, here's our problem, guys. Our problem is this. Now, let's close our eyes and let's do some brainstorming, all right? So part of using our imagination is that we do brainstorming. Brainstorming is the ability to think and use our imagination. Now, I'm going to tell you a couple of secrets on how to brainstorm, all right? Very short and simple. The first is when you brainstorm is don't worry about, putting them in order, your thoughts in order. So the way that you use your imagination and your thoughts to brainstorm is here's a couple of rules. One is try not to write them down yourself. Have someone else write it down, or if you can't have someone else write it down, tape yourself. Your iPhone has the ability to record audio. So put it on record and start talking, right? Close your eyes and just start talking. The reason why you don't want to write it down yourself is because you're going to be worried about your grammar, your writing, all these things, whether it's typing, whatever it is. You're so focused on that you're not allowing the flow of ideas and imagination to flow out and to come out. And you don't want anything to prevent that from happening. So that's why, I recommend either having someone else write it down or use a recorder. The other reason why you don't want to worry about sequence, is because sometimes sequences might get you confused and might slow you down. That's not to say that you can't think of it in a sequential way. It just means that you shouldn't be overly worried about that. You can, if a thought comes in your mind that is not part of the sequence, just state that thought. Because if you start saying, well, I'll remember that later, chances are you're not going to remember that later. So just do a dump. Just dump everything out. So that's step one in brainstorming. Step two of brainstorming is then reviewing all of those ideas and maybe grouping them and eliminating them into different paths that you might go through, right? And making them into more of a cohesive understanding, all right? And then once you make them into more of a cohesive steps and ideas, then you can eliminate certain things that you like or dislike, and then you choose one or two to execute on. So that's the process of brainstorming. Now, you might say, well, that was pretty simple. Well, the simple sometimes is too simple, and people make it more complex than what it needs to be. But really, that's what it is. Using our imagination to flow out the ideas, and then later using deductive reasoning and judgment to eliminate and put in sequential order. This is what you need to do to brainstorm those ideas, so that helps you problem solve. Okay, so let's talk about risk management. So risk management, as a Marine, we had to make a lot of critical decisions based off of threat analysis. Some of the decisions we have to make literally in a matter of seconds, because it could be life or death situation for 60 of your Marines if you're a platoon commander. So risk management is really high, and decision making is really high on a very quick basis in the Marines. People who sometimes, the one thing I do want to emphasize that the Marines have is that we really understand and put risk in its proper place. I find that people who never served in the military, or especially in the Marines, they I hate to say this, but we make mountains out of molehills. We really do. And in the Marines, we had a saying that said, "Don't sweat the little stuff." Right? Don't sweat the little stuff. A lot of times we're so focused on the little stuff that we really, really don't worry about the big stuff, in doing that. I remember throwing my first grenade. I was so scared, and I thought maybe I didn't even get it over the wall, but I did. And, and it exploded, and I was like, wow, the second time I did it wasn't that scary. But there is a reasonableness in risk management, okay? A lot of times people lose the reasonableness of risk management because they haven't really felt risk in their lives, And so as Marines, we're taught to be risky, And so we can, we know what the little risk is compared to big risks, okay? I mean, we're in life and death situations, so we kind of have to be reasonable on those risk management. So one of the things I want to emphasize is we got to be reasonable. We can't let our emotions take over us and control our fears and then create this risk management style that is a knee-jerk reaction based off of emotionalism or based off of hypochondria, okay? So what are the reasonable basic understanding, okay? So the basic steps of risk management is the idea of understanding that risk is really like an onion, all right? Onions have layers. And so risk actually has layers. Now, I'm going to give you 3 layers that risk managers you can have, okay? And the first layer, the inner core, or the most dangerous risk are what we call clear and present danger. That's the inner core. That is the danger that is in front of you. Now, the reason why it's called clear and present danger is because it's clear. We clearly see the danger. It's happening right now. And it's present. It's not going to happen in the future. Didn't happen in the past. It's happening right now. It's present. And it's dangerous. All right? So bear with me a little bit because I'll use a military analogy to this. So let's say I'm getting ambushed. That means the enemy is shooting at my Marines. All right? If I'm getting ambushed, I know clearly that the machine guns are them shooting at me and the machine guns are my clear and present danger. It's happening. They're shooting at us. All right? That is there. That's going on. That's the inner core. That's what you need to make a decision on. That's what you absolutely need to start mitigating and starting to accomplish to get rid of that danger. The next layer of that onion is what I call clear and predictable danger. All right? It means that this danger is clear. It's going to happen. When I see it, it's going to happen. And it's predictable. It's just a logical sequence that this danger is going to happen. So, for example, using the military analogy, I know that once I'm ambushed, if I stay in this position, I'm going to get pinned down. And once I get pinned down, they're going to start firing either artillery or mortar rounds in my location. They're not doing it now, but I know for a fact they're going to do it. That's a predictable danger that's going to occur. So I need to mitigate that. That means I got to get my Marines moving, maybe moving past the ambush site and going right in front of the fire, believe it or not. That's what you got to do, and move in that position. Because now I can mitigate the mortar rounds because I'll be in their position and not in my position. So that's called clear and predictable danger. The next is hypothetical danger. All right? And there's 2 types of hypothetical danger. But what is it? Hypothetical danger is danger that could or could not, might or might not happen. They're hypothetical. We can deduce that it could happen, and we can deduce that it might not happen. There are certain things maybe altering in courses that might occur. But these are all hypothetical. So I break that down into 2 categories. High-level hypothetical and low-level hypothetical. High-level hypothetical are dangers that there's a likely chance that this is going to happen. And I'll give you an example. Car insurance, right? We have car insurance. And car insurance premiums for teenage boys. I got I have two boys who are drivers, and my premiums went skyrocketing, right? Because I have now two teenage boys who drive. Why is that? That's because statistically speaking, boys will be in an accident. All right, teenage boys are high risk. So that's what we would call a high-level hypothetical. It doesn't mean that we're saying that my boys are going to get into an accident. We're not saying that. It's not predictable that that's going to happen. It just means there's a high chance that they will. They might, right? It's hypothetical, but there's a high chance that they might. So that's what we call high-level hypothetical. And then a low-level hypothetical, a good example of that is life insurance. Now, the chances of you really dying, all right, before the age of 70 is unlikely, right, statistically speaking, but it happens and it can happen, right? So we pay for life insurance that we're betting that that if I do die at a young age, that my kids will be provided, my wife and my kids will be provided for life insurance. So is it really absolutely necessary that I need life insurance? No. So I take that risk to say, no, I don't. I think I'm going to live to be 70 and I'll be able to provide for them until they're grown up and they can provide for themselves. But is there a chance that I could die of a car accident, diseases, airplane crash? Certainly there is. So those are low-level hypothetical. Can I get into a car accident? Yes, that's a low-level hypothetical. Can I get into an accident in an airplane? Yes, I can. But these are low-level hypothetical. That's the category that you have to look at. Then we use our imagination and our reasonableness to understand what are those risks, and are they really clear and present danger? Are there clear and predictable danger and hypothetical danger? And I'll give you a clear example of this. I had a friend of mine who had a business, and he thought by creating this business, all of a sudden he's going to get a flood of customers coming in, and it didn't happen. So at one point he was thinking about committing suicide because he thought he was such a failure. But I looked at him and I said, you have to use your reason, okay? So in this example, his clear and present danger was not going out of business. That's actually a hypothetical danger. That's not even a clear and present danger. So here he is thinking about committing suicide based off of a hypothetical danger, okay? His clear and present danger really is not getting the sales, not bringing in customers into his shop. That's his clear and present danger, all right? That's what he needs to worry about. How do I get customers inside of my business, right? That's the immediate threat that he has. And that's clear, and that's present, and that's the danger. The clear and predictable danger, the secondary danger I call it, is his cash flow. His cash flow, we know as businessman, he is not going to have a proper cash flow because the customers aren't coming in to generate the revenue into his cash flow. So his cash flow, at least in the beginning, is going to be really awkward. It's going to be low income and high expenses, right? So that's called the secondary or the clear and predictable danger. Now, the hypothetical danger is that he can go out of business, all right? It's a hypothetical there because any event can prevent that from happening. So really, if he were to focus on the clear and present danger, which is the idea that I have to get more sales, it's then going to mitigate his cash flow, okay, which is his clear and predictable danger, which will then alter the course of his hypothetical danger, which is he's going to go out of business and be in debt hundreds of thousands of dollars. See that? See how we can reason and deduce this risk management by understanding what truly is the clear and present danger? Removing the emotionalism out of the decision. Here he is being frightened about a hypothetical issue that that might occur, but not until a year from now. And he was going to base his life and death situation based off of a hypothetical, when instead he needs to focus on what truly is the clear and present danger and clear and predictable danger, which is not getting the sales, which is going to impact his cash flow. So that's how we do risk management. All right. So the discernment process, all right, we have a discernment process. Now, when I say discernment here, one of the big things we have to understand is discernment is not just related to vocations. I know in a proper sense, people relate this just to a vocation, what God wants, marriage state or whatever it is. But I'm a firm believer that we should always be discerning God's will, regardless of what, even if we are in a vocation, but to discern the decisions, key decisions that we have to know. So the methodology in discerning, all right, our vocation, we should also be using to discern key decisions in our lives. I frequently use this methodology when I have to make a decision to let someone go, aka fire someone, because I don't like doing that. I don't like doing that because I know it impacts people's lives. But I have to weigh the cost of I have to run a business because I have to also worry about my other employees who are being productive, who also need to, who are making money, because a non-productive person will be a drag on a business and could put you out of business. So there has to be, people who are non-productive need to be let go. So I frequently use this methodology, okay? But you can use discernment on key decisions at work, in family. Maybe it's whether to homeschool, not to homeschool. Maybe it's to, what kind of job that you want to get, what job you don't want to get. Maybe the transition in life. Maybe it's, how you're having issues with your teenager and you don't know how to handle it. Should I be hard on them? Should I be soft on them? Should I punish them? How hard should I punish them? Spirituality, to discern key spiritual things. Should I be doing soup kitchen? Should I be lecturing? All these things that go on. So whatever. So the discernment really is a way to discern what is this key decision I need to make. So I want to clarify what discernment is all about. So I want to tell you a little story, is real quick, which is I had a friend of mine who was, she knew she really liked this person who was a married man. And, this person, my friend was a woman. And so the man that she liked was a married man. And they weren't having a really good relationship and they were going through a divorce but no annulment process. And so she was a fairly good Catholic, and she knew her faith, and she kept discussing about reading God's will. And she's saying, I think God wills me to have this relationship with this man. And she explained to me that she, asked God about, to give me a sign. And so she saw this leaf flip over unexpectedly. And she said, that was my sign. I'm like, really? Like maybe that was just the wind blowing the leaf, But the point I'm getting at is we create these ridiculous signs and symbols when we want to do something unethically or unmorally, and we use lack of reason because emotionalism gets hold of ourselves. And so that's what happens. So we need to use this discernment process to minimize our emotions and use our reason to think about our decision. Okay? So it's basically a couple of steps here, all right? The first step in discernment is we must investigate and make judgments and deductive reasoning based on facts and playing things out. So discernment is not outside of reason. God does not typically think outside of reason. So when we need to to think about key decisions to make, you have to weigh the facts. You have to play out the facts. How is this going to affect my family? How is this going to affect myself? How is it going to affect the place I live in? How is it going to affect the people that I'm interacting with? Can this even be done? Is it morally correct? Do I have certain biasness towards this? So all of these things are going to be reasonably deduced. So that's step one. So we're not going to go outside of reason. We're not going to do that. So we have to understand that nothing that God wants us to do is immoral. So we have to bounce that off of the teachings of the moral laws and the Catholic Church. All right? A classic example is my friend who wanted to start dating this married man and doing that. That would be against the Catholic Church's teaching. And God would never want that to happen. The next is we should always be praying in this during this process, either to shed new light or guidance in the decision. There's only a few times I can remember in my life that God, I think, explicitly told me, you need to do this. But 9 out of 10 times, most of the time I should say, He will not give you explicit answers. He will just maybe enlighten you and help you with what it is. So for me, I always discern after Mass because I receive Holy Eucharist. I feel I'm really holy and I'm not emotional. I'm usually at peace. And that's the best time for me to pray and discern. If it's really weighty, I will combine confession with Mass. Okay? If it's really weighty. Because going to confession and going to Mass then eliminates most of my emotionalism, most of my biasness. And not only that, but I'm in a state of holiness, in a state of grace, that the conduit from God to me hopefully will be at its best chance. So that's what I do. So it's not just praying. I'm really making the opportune time, like after Mass or going after confession and Mass, to make those decisions and ruminating over those ideas. So again, eliminate a lot of the emotions. And, I will say that, most of the people, all the people that I've let go, I've never regretted. I never regret. When you go through this discernment process, from a reasonable standpoint, from a logical standpoint, and even from a holy standpoint, this was the right decision. And you're at peace in making those decisions because you discerned it. You didn't make an emotional decision, And I will say this, a person who's been in my position, where I've been, if they've been working for me for at least 3 months, because the first couple of months, I'll be honest with you, if I know that they're really bad, it's easy for me just to say, okay, you need to go because this is not really a good fit. But if they're there longer than 3 months, I go through this discernment process, and it takes me almost 4 weeks to make a decision on this because I really have to go through that discernment process. So you have to have time. So that's the most important thing. So bottom line, we need to rely more on the intellectual knowledge and less on getting the quick answers from sensory knowledge such as Google or some other person. This ability will then allow us to succeed in any endeavor at work, home, and spirituality. The lack of success is because there is no foolproof methodology or recipe that fits all people. In all situations for all times, life is dynamic and fluid, each with their own issues and problems. A proverb says, you cannot step into the same river twice, meaning the flow of the water is different each step. That's how fluid and dynamic life is. So God gave us an intellect to help us navigate the problems, risks, and discern our actions to grow in holy success. So let's use our intellect and our will to do that. So let's end it with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear Lord Jesus, we come, you gave us this great faculty called the intellect. Help us to use it. Help us to discern what is your will and to do it wholeheartedly through our reason, through our imagination, through our love. As we pray, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Thanks for listening to me, David Cease, at Practical Catholic. Here is a reflection for you. Take a moment and reflect, how often do I really rely on others or Google to quickly give me the answers, rather than using my intellect to bring ideas and deduce answers from reason? Feel free to share your reflection or leave a comment on the podcast, Instagram, and Facebook at Practical Catholic, or visit my webpage at practicalcatholic1, that is the number 1.com. Join me next week as we discuss what causes our intellect to be neglected, causing our imagination go wild, and how to prevent better use of our intellect, especially in meditation.
You're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom